In this session we're going to look at how to complete the assessment task for Unit Standard 7115, which is create and maintain a positive learning environment for adult learners. So if you haven't already done so, you'll need to have in front of you a pen and the Edbiz assessment task for 7115. It should be a stapled booklet that's in your trainee pack. So if you haven't got that in front of you, please just pause this video and grab it, and then you can resume. Okay, so you've got your assessment task booklet in front of you. What we're going to do is we're going to have a look through it, and I'm going to give you some guidance in terms of how to interpret and understand the requirements of this assessment task. So here we have on the front cover just a bit of background. This is a level 4 unit standard, and it's 6 credits. If you're working towards your national certificate in adult education and training, those 6 credits will count towards that qualification. So let's have a look at what we need to do. This front page of the assessment task booklet is what you'll need to complete. You'll need to put in your learner details, your name, last name there, your first and middle names in this box here, your date of birth in these boxes, your gender. If you know your NSN number or NSI number, sometimes referred to as also your NZQA number, then you can put it in this box here. If you don't, then so long as we have your date of birth and your last and first and middle names, then we can track it down for you. And in this box here, if you just like to put in the organisation that you work for. These boxes down here is what the assessor will complete, the assessment and assessor details, so don't worry about that. And as we go on to page 2 here, you'll see an overview of the assessment instructions and conditions. Very first thing is you'll see the outcomes for this assessment, and by the end of this unit standard you should be able to prepare a positive learning environment to suit the characteristics of adult learners, create and maintain a positive learning environment for adult learners, and lastly review the creation and maintenance of a positive learning environment. So as you guessed by the title, the assessment task is about creating and maintaining a positive learning environment. Now just a note here that throughout the assessment task, while creating and maintaining a positive learning environment, you must comply with the Health and Safety and Employment Act 1992. Okay. If you haven't been advised already, there is a due date for your assessment. That's a final date by which you must have your assessment task completed and sent to Edbiz for marking. If you do not know this date, please contact Edbiz and we will advise you what your assessment due date is. If something comes up that will make it difficult for you to complete your assessment before the assessment due date, then you'll need to contact us and apply for an extension to your assignment. Now just down to the instructions. You'll achieve competency for this unit standard by completing a series of workbook exercises. These are exercises that are in the assessment task. Creating and maintaining a positive learning environment throughout the delivery of a series of learning sessions. Now for this task, you'll need to complete 3 learning sessions. So in this case here, you'll need to complete 3 different learning sessions. And each session must be at least 30 minutes of teaching time per session. So 3 different learning sessions, each session must be at least 30 minutes of teaching time per session. Just remember that. Now, a learning session is defined as a learning or training event that can be part of a course but has its own internal coherence in terms of outcomes and subject matter coverage, and is sufficiently discrete to be able to stand on its own. Now what we mean by that is that a training session could be part of a larger course. So a 30-minute training session where you're giving at least 30 minutes teaching time. Could be part of a one day teaching, or 1 day course, or half a day course. So you don't necessarily have to think about a teaching session being a whole course. It could be part of a course. Now, the key things for this assessment is that a learning session must be able to stand on its own. So it has to be based on a topic. So it could be taught on its own if it had to be. So for example, if you're just doing an introduction to a course, then that would not be a suitable teaching session, because that's not something you could take out and deliver on its own. Okay, but if you're delivering a session on the introduction to the Health and Safety and Employment Act, then that could be a session that could stand on its own. It would have its own learning outcomes, and that would be something that you could use for this assessment task. So it's up to you how you pick what sessions you're going to use, so long as they're different, so long as each session has its own outcomes, and each session has at least 30 minutes of teaching time. So your session could be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, it could be a whole day. So it's really up to you what's going to be the easiest way for you to create your evidence portfolio. Now you see here a definition of a positive learning environment. It's one that encourages learners to achieve their potential, identifies and accommodates their individual learning needs and preferences, and deals sensitively with issues that arise within groups. So throughout this assessment, part of your evidence will be around creating an environment that achieves that. Just a note there on the bottom of page 2. Again, 3 different learning sessions, at least 30 minutes teaching time per session. Let's have a look now at page 3. This is a pre-assessment interview and checklist. Now you don't need to complete this at this stage. You can just leave that blank. Alright, and we can come back to that later. Next page, this must be page 4, is task 1, preparing a positive learning environment. Now, one reason why your assessment task booklet is so thick excuse me, is that the evidence that you need for each session has been duplicated. So you'll see that the evidence for task 1 repeated 2 more times, once for each session. Now for session 1, you'll need to put the name of the session, whatever it is you're going to call it. And then there's a series of questions that you need to answer. Most of these are, I suppose, multi-choice questions, but you need to think about who your learners are going to be for that session. So, for example, what's the motivation of those learners who are coming to your session? Now, just a note, for this assessment task, it doesn't have to be done as a group. It can be just a small, like 2 or 3 learners. So it doesn't have to be a large group of learners for you to complete this task. But you just need to think about them and think, well, what's the motivation? Why are they here? Is it because they have to be there due to compliance? Is it that the boss told them to be there? Was it that they're there to meet a personal need, so it's part of their professional development that they have to do? Or is it just something they're just doing out of their own interest? So answering these series of questions, next one is, what's the educational focus of the learners? Okay, just by going through and answering these questions, that's going to help you form a picture of who these learners are and what their needs are likely to be. So you'll work your way through those questions there, and if I just keep going down, it keeps going on to page 6, and it finishes here on page 7. So once you've answered those introductory questions, the last question here on page 7, if I just scroll up here, page 7 says, well, based on your answers to those questions, what characteristics does this specific group of adult learners have that need accommodating? Okay. So based on your answers to those previous questions, what kind of training resources are you going to need to provide for them? That may include stationery, may include workbooks, it may include dictionaries, It may include handouts, summaries, standard operating procedures, photographs. What kind of training resources are you going to need to supply based on that learner profile? What kind of equipment will you need? Do you need a data projector? Do you need a laptop? Do you need some machinery? Do you need personal protective equipment? So what kind of equipment do you need to facilitate that training session? The next one is location. Where's this training session ideally going to be delivered? For example, is it best in a classroom? Is it best out in the workshop? A combination of both. So where's the best location? And the last thing is learning activities. So based on your answers to those previous questions, what kind of learning activities are going to be relevant and meaningful to this group of learners? For example, are you going to let them have a go at doing a practical task? Are they going to be watching a video? Are they going to be completing some workbook exercises? Are they going to do some group work, group discussion? So what kind of learning activities is going to happen in that training session that you're going to deliver based upon those answers to those questions that you answered just previously? That really forms the learner profile for your group of learners. So the last one here, that'll be page 8, is the structure of the session plan. So you've only got a little bit of room here just to give some bullet points in terms of how's the session going to be structured. So obviously there's going to be a bit of an introduction. So what's going to happen in the introduction? What are you going to talk about to establish the need and the what's in it for me factor, the learning objectives? How are you going to deliver the content? How are you going to let them have a go? How are you going to let them play around with the information, ideas? And how are you going to evaluate, review, sum up, do the assessment? How's that going to take place? Now you've only got enough room there just to give it in a really bullet point nutshell. Okay. So just give a really high level plan in terms of how you think that session is going to be structured. Alright, now that is task 1 completed. So it's not too hard. It's just a bit of pre-course, pre-session planning. So now that you've done all the planning, you know what you need to do to create a positive learning environment. Now task 2 is about you maintaining that positive learning environment. Now what you need to complete this task is you'll need an observer. Now ideally your observer will be someone who already holds unit standard 7115, or someone who holds adult education qualification, or someone who is your direct supervisor or manager. Now that may be the same person, okay? But in either case, it needs to be someone who either you report to or someone who already holds a qualification that's equivalent. So your observer will need to fill in this observation check sheet here. So it'd be a really good idea before you actually start these training sessions, before you get too far down the track, of identifying who that observer is going to be and giving them the heads up in terms of what you're going to need them to do. So your observer will complete this observation check sheet. So your observer should be given plenty of warning, plenty of time to have a look through this. They'll need to put in your name, their name, the start and finish time of the training session, what the topic is. And what you'll see here is a whole lot of criteria that you'll need to be observed on. So the first one here is around the learning environment. First criteria: was the physical layout of the training space appropriate? Was it too crammed? Was it easily accessible for the learners? Were the learners comfortable? Was the pre-course welcoming? So when you welcome students as perhaps they came in or came to that session. So your observer needs to go down and observe these things. Now If your observer observes that you do each of these, then they have to tick the box. Okay, those boxes there. If all of those boxes are ticked, then they can tick the yes box over here. Okay. Now all of these boxes have to be ticked in order for your observer to tick the yes box over here. Okay. So it's a really good idea for you to make sure that you familiarize yourself with all of these things, because unless you actually deliver them during your training session, then your observer is not going to be able to tick you off on them. So you need to make sure that you take some time to think about how you're going to make your learners comfortable, how you're going to lay out your training space, how you're going to welcome them, what kind of icebreaker are you going to use if that's relevant, how you're going to establish the ground rules. It could be like turning off mobile phones, no talking over each other, respect for each other, etc. How you're going to encourage interactive participation, and how you're going to establish rapport with that group of learners. So you can see here there's lots of things that you need to think about before you go about even delivering this training session. You're going to have to make sure that you communicate the learning outcomes clearly. Is that going to be on PowerPoint? Is that just going to be you talking about them? Is it going to be on a flip chart or on the whiteboard? And how are you going to make sure that those learning outcomes are agreed before the training? So you might talk to supervisors, you might talk to other stakeholders, your head of department or whoever it is who's a stakeholder in your organisation or the organisation you're going to be training for, and just how did you make sure that those learning outcomes for the session that you are going to deliver had been agreed. Okay. Now the other things that you're going to be observed on is support. So you're going to need to make sure that you advise your learners of support options. Support options could be resources such as books, internet, handouts, but it could also be people as well. So it could be other tutors, trainers, it could be yourself after the training, it could be a phone number they can call, it could be an agency they can go and see. So you need to make sure that during your session, somewhere in there, that you advise your learners of support options that they can access after your training session. That's going to help to consolidate and help make sure that they can apply what they've learnt and make sure they can be looked after. Then, did the learners avail themselves to the support options that you presented? Okay, so did any of them say yes, I might want to access that, or that's something that's going to be useful for me? And the last one here, did any learner requiring support not avail themselves to the support available? Now that's what we mean by that. Is there any learners in that training session who probably really do need support, who didn't make it known to you? So maybe because they were shy or embarrassed or didn't hear you properly or were confused. But were there any learners there who really probably need support after the training session but did not make themselves known or did not make it known to you that they need support? So your observer is going to be looking for these things. This next section here is accommodation, recognition of individual learning needs and styles. So the criteria you're going to be observed on here is, did the trainer use a variety of teaching materials and methods to cater for different learner needs? So if we're thinking about, for example, visual learners who learn by looking at pictures and diagrams and posters and observations and watching you, learners who are kinesthetic learners who prefer to learn by getting in and involved and doing it hands-on, learners who prefer to learn by listening, and learners who prefer to read and absorb information that way. So you're going to need to make sure that in that 30-minute session that the teaching methods that you use include a variety. Was the delivery effectively modified to meet learners' learning styles, changing needs or personalities? So what we mean by that, if the observer sees you delivering your training session and a lot of your learners are falling asleep or looking bored or looking confused, did you change your teaching method? to respond to that appropriately. Was explanation and demonstration used? So what we mean by that is, did you explain the content and did you also show them as well, demonstrate it? Did you get them into small groups, and did you get them to do some work on their own? Was that encouraged? Were participatory techniques used? So for example, they could have been case studies, experiments, problem solving, application. Was opportunity there for individual practice, for learners to do it on their own? Were learners encouraged to relate new or difficult concepts to their existing base of experience? So did you, for example, ask them, where have they seen this concept before? How could they use this back on the job, or in the real world, or in life outside of training? Did you encourage all individuals to actually get involved and contribute? And when they did contribute, were their contributions supported and acknowledged by you? And were all questions and comments protected and individual opinions treated with respect? Okay. Now, a few more things you're going to be observed on. Were opportunities provided for reflection and recapitulation, so recaps? Did all the learners feel they could give feedback, and were all learners provided with continuous feedback? This next section, did the trainer encourage all learners to participate? Was delivery modified to accommodate contingencies and time constraints? So if you're running out of time, did you change the way that you're delivering and maybe miss out some content, but say perhaps, well look, have got enough time for this bit, but it's going to be in your handout? Was delivery modified to accommodate contingencies and learner needs? So you found that perhaps your learners weren't responding well to the delivery methods that you were using. So did you modify your delivery to perhaps, for example, instead of talking a lot, you found that your learners really wanted to actually get involved and do things? So when you recognise that, did you get them more involved and maybe change the way you were delivering to get them and doing more hands-on stuff? Was delivery modified to accommodate contingencies and resource availability? So for example, your data projector might not have been available or stopped working. Perhaps pen did not work, or perhaps there was a light bulb above the whiteboard wasn't working, so people couldn't see. So did you modify your delivery to accommodate those sorts of things? Did all learners participate? Did all learners contribute to a discussion? Did the trainer promote an environment that learners felt they could ask questions? And did you manage the class discussions appropriately? And did you answer the questions that were raised? Were all learners' achievements acknowledged, and were opportunities provided for learner reflection and evaluation? This next session here is on distractions and behavioural disruptions. So did you identify distractions and disruptions that happened during the training session, and did you manage to resolve any distraction or disruption in a quick and appropriate manner? It could be someone's mobile phone going off, it could be someone else coming into the training room and maybe asking for one of your participants to come out. It could be a noise that's happening outside, maybe a digger or or something that's happening that might be distracting. Did you use the group of learners to help resolve the distraction or disruption? And did you use an appropriate strategy to manage non-environmental disruptions? So for example, using humour, diversion or direction. Now we're almost there. Were environmental distractions quickly detected and resolved? So environmental distractions, outside noise, smells, bad smells, burning smells, body odour, heat, too hot in the classroom, too cold in the classroom, too noisy where you're training. Did you retain good class control, and was the group morale maintained? Now the last thing, throughout your training session, did you comply with the Health and Safety and Employment Act? Some examples where you might not have done that could be perhaps you're training in an environment where you should have been wearing PPE gear, personal protective equipment, and you weren't. So that may include earmuffs, hard hats, steel cap boots. It could be in a classroom where perhaps the cords may have been across the floor where people could have tripped, broken chairs, things that could put people at risk of being hurt. Now once your learner has observed you do that, he or she will complete their signature and the date down there. Now you'll see there's a lot of things there that you need to be observed on, and some of them will be relevant to your training session. There might be the odd one or two that perhaps are less relevant. Now it's really about creating, maintaining a positive learning environment, and if your observer is unsure about any of those things, then they should use their professional judgment, and if they're still not sure, then they can contact Edbiz for a bit of clarification if they're not sure whether or not they should tick a box as being observed or not. Now that observation is a big part of your assessment task. There's one other thing you need to have done at each session, is that you need to have one of your trainees during that session to complete the participant feedback form. So what I would encourage you to do is well in advance of you delivering that training, to identify who one of your trainees or learners is going to be for that session, and invite him or her to give you some feedback once you've done that training session. So what would happen is I would recommend that you give your trainee this form before the training session, and then your trainee can read it, familiarise him or herself with this form. If he or she needs to clarify any of these things with you, then they can do that before the training, and then I would encourage him or her to complete this immediately after you've done that training session. Okay, so there's a lot of questions or criteria on here that are very similar to what your observer observed you on. Now this is just a one-page one, so it's not as comprehensive as your observer's form, but this one is done by your trainee or one of your trainees in that session, and he or she will complete it. Okay, and then give that back to you at the end. Now we want honest feedback, so you need to make sure that you encourage your student to be really honest with giving this feedback, and not just tick yes without reading the criteria. Really needs to make sure that that feedback is objective. So your learner will complete that form, your observer will complete that more extensive form. Now what you'll need to do, once you've done that training session, once you've got the feedback from your observer and from one of your learners, you need to collate that feedback, and in this table here, on this side here, you can put down some notes. Okay, what's 2 or 3 of those themes that have come back through that feedback you received from your learner, okay, and from your observer? Is there things there that you think you could improve on? If so, in this column, that's where you'll put your note on any future improvements. Okay. How you could do better if you had to deliver that same training session again in the future. What would you do differently? Now check this out. This is where the duplication starts happening. So now you've got exactly the same set of forms. All right, the instructions, the creating of your learner profile, thinking about the training session, the observation form for your observer, and the participant feedback from your participants. So I'm just going all the way down here. Task 2. Now you've seen all these before. Now the reason why they're coming up again is because these are the forms for your second session. Okay. Now they're exactly the same as what you did for the first one. Alright, so you'll see there task 3 is the same, task 2, Alright, so you go through exactly that same process again for your second session, and check this out, the same forms are duplicated again for your third session. Okay. Now you need to use these forms that are in this assessment task. If you have your own organisation observation forms, they probably won't meet the criteria of the standard, so we do need you to use the observation forms that are in your assessment pack. Okay. So your observer will need to observe you delivering those 3 sessions. If the training session goes for more than a couple of hours, then your observer may decide that once he or she's seen you deliver for an hour and a half, 2-3 hours, that he or she's seen enough and may be confident that you've met all the criteria. Okay, so I know sometimes it can be pretty difficult to pull someone out just to sit in and observe you deliver these sessions over a period of time. So if there's going to be some difficulties in managing that, then like I said, if it's a long session, then that observer might come in and out. Your observer may be sitting in the back of the room checking his or her emails as well, so they don't have to be solely focused on you in that whole time. So that might be a good idea as well, just to make sure that your observers not getting behind in their other work and responsibilities. So you can let your observer know that that is okay, so long as they are able to observe you meeting those criteria, or attempting to meet those criteria in your training session. Now all of your 3 training sessions need to be observed. So I'm just going to go down now towards the end of the assessment task, which I think is there, page 37. Once you've delivered your 3 training sessions and you've had them observed by an observer, and you've got at least one of your learners to complete that feedback form, and then for each session you've read the feedback and you've decided how you might want to improve if you had to deliver that same training session again based on that feedback, then you'll collate all that together and you will discuss that with your manager or supervisor. And then you and your manager will complete this page 37 here. Your manager will complete this section here just to test or verify that he or she can confirm that this was your own work, it wasn't a training session delivered by another trainer, that the information that you've produced is current, and that your delivery of those training sessions were in accordance with your organisation's policies, procedures and requirements. Okay. Now there is a summary of what you need to send in, alright, on page 38. Now if you have an older version of the assessment task, you'll see the address here. Now this address is incorrect. Okay, do not send your portfolio to this address. What we'd recommend is that you send your portfolio to the address that's in your course participant handbook, not this address here. We're in the process of updating our assessment tasks. If you have an older one that has this address in it, it is incorrect, so please don't send it there. Alright. Also, just to be advised that you must keep a copy of your portfolio, just in case something happened and it got sent to the wrong address or got lost in the mail. Then you've got a backup, because if something did happen and you don't have a backup, you may have to actually complete the whole assessment task all over again. Okay, so we don't want that to happen, so just make sure that you do that. The next page, post-assessment review, you don't have to do anything with that. Okay, that's for our own organisational policies and processes. The same stuff there on page 40 as well. Okay, so you'll see there on pages 42 to 45, this is how you're going to be assessed. So when you send your portfolio in, we've got the evidence, what Edbiz are going to be looking to see that you provide, and then the judgment, how good your evidence needs to be. So you've got a copy of that as well there. So what we recommend you do is familiarise yourself with this assessment task booklet information. And if you have any questions, please give Edbiz a phone call or an email around what we've just looked at. Remember, you have a due date for this assessment task, and like I said, if there's anything you're not sure of, please give us a call. So I hope this session's been helpful for you. You can watch it again. That's the advantage of having it videotaped. So good luck with your assessment, and we look forward to getting you through the standard.